You're making everyone uncomfortable just by being here. I think it's time for you to go. She said it quietly, almost sweetly, like she was doing me a favor. Standing there in that cream-colored ballroom with chandeliers dripping light onto guests I had never met, I looked at my brother's future mother-in-law and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, not humiliation, just a strange, hollow kind of clarity. I nodded, set my champagne glass on the nearest tray, and walked toward the exit without a single word. Outside, the evening air hit my face and I stood on the stone steps for a moment, breathing it in. Then I called my husband. "Hey," I said when he picked up. "I left the party." There was a pause. "You left? Already? What happened?" She asked me to go. So I went. Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm on my way," he said. His voice was very calm. That particular kind of calm that, after 11 years of marriage, I had learned to recognize. "Daniel, you don't have to. I'm on my way," he said again, and the line went quiet. I sat down on the steps and waited. And while I waited, I thought about how strange it was that my entire life had led to this exact moment. A woman I had known for 3 hours had looked me up and down in a room full of strangers and decided I wasn't worth the space I was standing in. And the worst part was that somewhere deep down, I wasn't even surprised. My name is Sarah. I'm 38 years old. I've been married to my husband for 11 years, and before that, for almost a decade, the most important person in my life was my younger brother, Tommy, who is 26 now, and, as of last Saturday, officially engaged to a woman named Claire Henderson. The Henderson family owns 3 manufacturing plants and a commercial real estate portfolio that stretches across 4 states. I know this because Claire mentioned it, gently and often, during the first dinner we had together. Tommy, for his part, looked at her the way people look at something they can't quite believe is real. I understood that look. I had seen it on his face exactly twice before, once when he got his acceptance letter to the state university, and once on the night I told him I was getting married. Tommy had a talent for being genuinely amazed by good things, which I always thought was remarkable, given the start he'd had. Our mother left when Tommy was 4 years old. I was 14. She didn't leave a note or a forwarding address. She was simply there one morning and gone by afternoon, and our father spent the next 2 years trying to drink himself into a place where that fact couldn't reach him anymore. By the time I was 16, I was cooking dinner every night and signing Tommy's permission slips and making sure he wore a coat when it was cold. By the time I was 19 and our father finally succeeded at the thing he'd been working toward, I was Tommy's only family left. I never thought of it as sacrifice. That's the thing people always want to say, that I sacrificed my childhood, my opportunities, my future. But when you love someone the way I loved Tommy, it doesn't feel like sacrifice. It feels like the only possible choice. There is no version of events in which I let a 4-year-old fend for himself so that I could go live on a college campus and worry about nothing. What I did was this. I got a job at a medical supply company 2 weeks after our father's funeral. I started as a receptionist, answering phones and sorting mail. I was good at it, and I was also good at noticing things: which orders were getting delayed, which suppliers were unreliable, which clients were unhappy before they said anything. My manager noticed me noticing, and within a year, she had moved me to logistics coordination. Within 3 years, I was managing a team of 12 people. I took night classes when Tommy was in bed. I got a certification, then another one. I built something, slowly and carefully, the way you build anything when you don't have the luxury of starting over if it falls apart. Tommy was a good kid. He was more than that. He was thoughtful and funny, and he worked harder than anyone I've ever known, because he understood, without me ever telling him directly, what it had cost to keep us together. He got into college on a partial scholarship. He worked part-time through all 4 years. He never once asked me for anything he didn't absolutely need, and sometimes he didn't ask even then. He met Claire in his final year at university, at a conference for young business professionals. She was sharp and ambitious, and she made him laugh. And when I finally met her over dinner at a restaurant she'd chosen somewhere with a wine list and no prices on the menu, I decided that I liked her, despite the mild discomfort of listening to her talk about her family's assets. It was Claire's mother who was the problem. Margaret Henderson was the kind of woman who had learned very early that the world rewards confidence, and had spent the subsequent 60 years perfecting the delivery. She was elegant in a way that felt deliberate, every gesture calibrated for effect. When she smiled at you, you felt it, and when she didn't, you felt that too. She had invited us, Tommy and Claire, and apparently me as some sort of courtesy, to a formal engagement dinner at the Henderson estate. It was a Sunday evening in late April, and the house was the kind of house that makes you recalibrate your understanding of the word. Not because of the size, though it was large. Because of the way it was arranged to make you aware of the size at every possible moment. Daniel couldn't make it at the start. He was wrapping up a project and planned to come later in the evening, after the formal dinner portion. I had assured him it was fine, that I was perfectly capable of attending a dinner party on my own. I arrived in a dress I had bought specifically for the occasion. I was not nervous. I had attended company dinners and board presentations and conferences where I was the youngest person in the room by 15 years. I was capable of navigating a formal social setting. Margaret Henderson greeted me in the foyer with a handshake and a look that traveled from my face to my shoes and back again. Quickly, in the way people do when they want to assess you without appearing to. "Sarah," she said, "Tommy's mentioned you. You work in medical supplies." "I'm the director of operations at a regional healthcare logistics firm," I said pleasantly. "Right," she said, as though I'd confirmed something she'd already decided. "Well, come in." Dinner was 12 people around a table that seated 20, which I suspected was intentional. Claire was warm and included me in conversations when she could. Tommy sat across from me and gave me a small, grateful look every few minutes. The other guests were business associates of the Henderson family, and the conversation moved almost exclusively through the world of investment portfolios and property development and the kind of financial planning that requires its own legal team. I listened. I asked questions when I had them. I did not pretend to be something I wasn't, but I also didn't diminish what I was. I thought the evening was going reasonably well. After dinner, the guests moved to a sitting room where someone was playing piano softly in the corner, and staff moved through the room with champagne and small desserts. I found myself standing near a window, watching the garden outside, when Margaret appeared at my elbow. "Can I speak with you privately?" she asked. It wasn't quite a question. She led me to a smaller room off the hallway, a study or a library, I'm not sure, lined with books that looked chosen for appearance, and then she turned to face me with an expression of practiced sympathy. "I'll be direct," she said. "I think it will save us both time." "Please," I said. "Claire is our only daughter. This marriage is important to us, and we intend to be very involved in their life together. Their social life, their business decisions, their household." She paused. "A family like ours has a certain presentation to maintain. The people in their circle will be clients, partners, donors. The events will be formal, high profile." Another pause, heavier this time. "I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this." "I'd rather you say it," I told her. She smiled, and it didn't reach anything. "You and Tommy had a difficult start. That's admirable, truly. But you're not the same kind of people anymore. He's entering a different world, and I think, if you love him the way you say you do, you understand that there are spaces where your presence would create complications, where it would be a distraction." I looked at her for a moment. "You want me to stay away from my brother. I want you to be realistic about what's best for him." "What's best for him?" I repeated. "You don't have the same background as our guests. You don't move in the same circles. Having you at our events would raise questions that shouldn't need answering." She delivered this the way someone delivers a memo. Efficiently, without emotional inflection. "I think you're a practical woman. I think you understand what I'm saying." Something moved through me then. Not the heat of anger, more like the cold stillness that comes right before it. "I understand exactly what you're saying," I told her. "Good." She moved toward the door. "The other guests are waiting. I think it's better if you say your goodbyes now. Tommy will understand. He's a sensible young man." And that was how I found myself on the front steps of the Henderson estate, in the April dark, waiting for my husband. I had not cried. I had not raised my voice. I had not said any of the things that rose up in me when she was talking about Tommy at 7 years old, sleeping in his coat because we couldn't pay the heating bill, about the 18-hour days and the nights I sat with him through fevers and nightmares, about the graduation ceremony I'd watched from the back because I'd arrived late from work and hadn't told him, hadn't wanted him to feel obligated to look for me, about every small, invisible, ordinary moment that added up to the person he had become. The person she was now claiming for her world. I hadn't said any of it. I had simply nodded and walked out. Daniel arrived 22 minutes later. He parked the car and came up the steps and sat down next to me without speaking. He put his hand over mine. We sat there in the dark for a minute. "Tell me," he said. I told him. All of it, from the moment I walked in to the moment I walked out. He listened the way he always listened, without interrupting, without performing a reaction. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said, and stood up. "Daniel, I'd like to go inside," he said. He straightened his jacket. "You don't need to do this." "I'm not doing it for need," he said, which was somehow both gentle and completely final. He rang the bell and we were shown back into the foyer by a member of staff who clearly wasn't sure what to do with us. Margaret Henderson appeared from the sitting room, and when she saw Daniel, her expression shifted in a way that told me she recognized him before he'd said a word. "Daniel," she said, and her voice had changed entirely. Warmer, more careful. "I didn't realize you were. Where is my wife?" he asked, pleasantly. He might have been asking about the weather. "Your wife, She glanced at me, standing beside him. "Sarah is right here. She was outside," he said, "on the steps. Alone." Why was she outside on the steps alone? Margaret. The name. Not Mrs. Henderson. Not a title. Just her name. In that level, unhurried voice. I watched something shift behind her eyes. "There was a misunderstanding," she said carefully. There was a conversation. And I think some things were." "What things?" Daniel said. She looked around, aware that staff and guests near the hallway could hear. "Perhaps we could speak privately." "I'm fine here," he said. "What things, Margaret?" She had the particular stillness of someone who has just realized they've walked into something they cannot walk back out of the same way they entered. I expressed some concerns about how Tommy and Claire's social circle might. "You told my wife she didn't belong here," Daniel said. "Not as an accusation. As a correction. The way you correct a factual error, quietly and without heat. You told her that her presence was an embarrassment, and then you asked her to leave her own brother's engagement dinner." "I didn't phrase it, Sarah," he said, without taking his eyes off Margaret. "How did she phrase it?" I looked at Margaret Henderson. She said my presence would create complications, that I didn't have the right background, that I would raise questions that shouldn't need answering. The hallway had gone very quiet. "I see," Daniel said. He stood there for a moment, and in that moment I was aware of how completely still he was. There was no anger in his face. That was the remarkable thing. He simply looked at her with a kind of focused attention that was, somehow, worse than anger. "I've been considering a fairly significant partnership with your husband's company," he said. "I think you may be aware of that." Margaret's expression moved in several directions at once. "I'm going to be withdrawing from those discussions," he said. "I want to be transparent about that so there's no confusion later." "Daniel." Her voice had lost its composure. "Please. You have to understand this was a misunderstanding. I would never." "You walked my wife to a private room and told her she was an embarrassment to your family's name," he said, still in that same quiet, even tone. "You've known her for 4 hours. She raised her brother alone, starting at 19 years old. And the person you're welcoming into your family exists because of what she did. I think you should understand that clearly." "I didn't know. You didn't ask," he said. "You assessed her and made a decision. I understand that. I'm making one too." He turned to look for Tommy, who had appeared in the doorway of the sitting room at some point and was standing very still, his face pale, his eyes moving between me and Daniel and his future mother-in-law. "Hey," Daniel said to him, calmly. "You okay?" Tommy looked at me. There was something in his face that I hadn't seen in a long time. The particular expression he used to make as a kid, when something had happened that he didn't have the words for yet, when he was trying to figure out what to feel. He crossed the hallway in about 4 steps and put his arms around me, and I felt him breathe out slowly against my shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice muffled. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she." "I know," I said. "I know you didn't. I'm not Claire, and I talked about this. We're not going to let Tommy." I pulled back and looked at him. "I'm fine. I promise I'm fine." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once. Then he turned around and looked at Margaret Henderson with an expression I recognized, quiet, resolved, The same look he'd had at 19 when he'd decided he was going to find his own way through school without borrowing any more from me. Claire and I will be making our own decisions about who's in our life, he said. I want to be clear about that. Sarah will be at our wedding. She'll be at everything. If that's a problem, then we should probably figure that out now. Claire appeared behind him and took his hand. She looked at her mother with an expression I couldn't fully read, not cold, not warm, somewhere in between, the look of someone quietly recalibrating. Mom, she said, and that was all. Just the one word. But something in it closed a door. Margaret Henderson stood in her own foyer, in her own home, surrounded by her guests and her staff and the furniture she'd arranged to impress people, and she looked diminished. Not by anyone's cruelty, no one had raised their voice, no one had said anything ugly. Just by the simple fact of what she had done, reflected back at her plainly in a room full of witnesses. I owe you an apology, she said to me. She said it quietly, without her earlier composure, and I believed she meant it, at least in that moment. Whether she would mean it tomorrow, I didn't know. I made assumptions that I had no right to make. I'm sorry. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about Tommy in his coat in our cold apartment. I thought about sitting in a hospital waiting room, filling out forms where the line said guardian, and writing my own name at 19 years old. I thought about every parent-teacher conference and every grocery run, and every night I lay awake trying to calculate whether I had enough for the next month's rent. Thank you, I said simply. Not because I owed her warmth, not because I had forgiven everything in that moment, but because I had learned a long time ago that there is a kind of dignity in not needing someone to suffer more than they already have. I had said what needed to be said. Daniel had said what needed to be said. Tommy had said what needed to be said. The room understood. That was enough. Daniel and I left shortly after. The drive home was quiet in the comfortable way, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. Somewhere around the halfway point, he reached over and took my hand on the center console. You doing okay? He asked. Yeah, I said. I think I actually am. He squeezed my hand once and let it go. In the weeks that followed, things settled into a new shape. Claire and Tommy moved forward with their wedding planning, and Tommy called me every few days the way he always had, and slowly, the dinner at the Henderson house became something we referred to with a kind of wry shorthand, rather than something we had to carefully avoid. Claire had a conversation with her mother that I was not present for, and that neither of them told me about directly, but whose effects I could see in the way Margaret Henderson greeted me at subsequent gatherings, still formal, still a little careful, but without the evaluating coldness, without the particular silence that means someone is calculating your worth. I don't know what she had expected to happen. I think she had assumed I would accept her assessment, the way people sometimes accept whatever they're told by someone who delivers it with enough confidence. That I would nod and step back and content myself with being kept at a comfortable distance, visible enough to prove she wasn't being cruel but far enough away to stop being inconvenient. I think she had looked at me and seen someone who had been managing quietly for so long that she would keep managing quietly, even when managing quietly meant making myself smaller than I was. She wasn't entirely wrong about my instinct. I had left without a scene. I had sat on those steps and breathed the evening air and felt the familiar exhaustion of being measured and found lacking by someone who knew nothing about the mathematics of my life. That part was old. I'd been navigating it since I was a teenager, showing up to things in the wrong clothes, since I was 20-something, attending work events where everyone else had come through a door I'd never been shown. What she had miscalculated was Daniel, not his position, not his business connections. I don't think she even knew about those until the moment he mentioned the partnership, and I don't think that's really the point anyway. What she miscalculated was the specific, uncomplicated way he moved through the world on my behalf. He didn't defend me by explaining me. He didn't offer context or credentials or a list of my accomplishments for her consideration. He simply stood in her hallway and asked where his wife was, and the question itself was enough to reframe everything. The question said, she is someone who is looked for. She is someone whose absence is noticed and whose presence is expected. Whatever you thought you were doing when you put her outside, you misunderstood the situation. I had spent a lot of years being someone who looked after things. That was the role I knew, the one I'd built myself around. It had taken me longer than I'd like to admit to understand that being looked after, being someone that someone else looks for, wasn't a diminishment of that. It was its own kind of thing, and it was allowed. Tommy's wedding was on a Saturday in September, at a venue outside the city, one that he and Claire had chosen together. The trees were just beginning to turn. The light was gold in the way it only is for about 2 weeks of the year. That particular September light that makes everything look like it's been painted rather than photographed. I stood in the front row with Daniel, and I watched my brother walk down the aisle with the particular solemnity of someone taking seriously the weight of a moment, and I thought about the distance between the kitchen of our father's apartment and this exact spot. I thought about every version of Tommy between 4 years old and 26, the whole accumulated chain of ordinary days that had made him into the person currently standing at the altar, and I felt something settle in me that had been moving for a long time. He looked at me once, right before the ceremony began, just for a second, and the look on his face was the same one I'd seen the night he opened his college acceptance letter, pure, unguarded amazement at the fact of something good. I smiled at him, and he smiled back. And then the music changed, and Claire appeared at the end of the aisle, and he forgot I existed. Which was exactly right. After the ceremony, during the reception, Margaret Henderson found me by the bar. She was holding a glass of white wine, and she looked for the first time since I'd met her, slightly uncertain. "He's remarkable," she said, nodding toward Tommy, who was on the dance floor making Claire laugh at something. I understand now, a little better, what it took." She paused. "What you did." I looked at her. "He did most of it himself," I said. "He always did." She nodded slowly, like she was filing something away. "Claire chose well," she said, and I wasn't sure if she meant Tommy or me, and I decided it didn't matter either way. Daniel appeared at my elbow with a glass of something and the casual ease of a man completely comfortable in his own space. "Everything okay over here?" he asked, in the warm, neutral way he had. "We're good," I said, and I meant it. Later that night, driving home with my shoes off and my feet up on the dashboard, the radio playing something low, I thought about what I would have said to the version of myself sitting on those stone steps in April. I would have said, "It resolves. Not perfectly, not without cost, but it resolves. The things you built do not disappear because someone fails to see them. The people you loved are not diminished because someone failed to value them correctly. You can walk out of a room without losing the room. You can leave without disappearing, and someone will come looking for you." I leaned my head back against the seat and watched the highway lights pass overhead, one after another, regular as breathing, and felt quietly, solidly, entirely fine.